I commend you for that, and just to go and have the bravery and the courage to tackle that.
I had suffered my first, this was my second panic attack of the year.
Because it can happen to anybody.
Or I feel so horrible all the time, and maybe, I'm starting to think about these terrible paths of self-harm or whatever.
Given that, what's your approach to this issue? Like, how does it differ from others in this space?
You are unwilling to put yourself out there, to have the courage to talk to somebody, to go to a psychiatrist, whatever it may be. You are valuing something else over your own mental health.
Well, welcome. We're back for another episode. Glad you guys are hanging out with us. And if you enjoy our content, make sure you subscribe to us, whether it's on the audio side or the video side, wherever you listen, wherever you watch. And check us out online as well at mikecpodcast.com. And today we have a very interesting guest. He's the author of the Get Out of Your Head book series. It's a collection of personal development tools focused on helping readers overcome various forms of mental illness. It's a really big issue today. The first entry in that series, Get Out of Your Head, a toolkit for living with and overcoming anxiety, was released in 2018. And he also runs a website and blog of the same name, getoutofyourhead.com. And through his site, he offers written advice and coaching to clients looking to make strides in their battles with mental illness. His desire to help others with anxiety and depression grew out of his own experiences with both afflictions. And throughout his works, he recounts his past struggles and due to not having the right information at his disposal. And so that's why he's so passionate about using his acquired skills to influence the lives of others and help them along in their journeys. And he wants to help as many of his followers as possible to avoid the same issues that he had once experienced. And we're happy to have with us on the podcast, Brian Sachetta. Brian, thanks for being here today, man.
Hey, Mike, thanks for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. We had some tech issues, so we're starting late, but I'm glad we got over it, and we're hearing each other good now. So always fun, always 5 minutes before a podcast start is when everything seems to go off the rails. But we got it together, right?
We did, yeah. So I'm ready to go.
Cool. So I want to start with your personal story. What put you on this journey of helping others? Was it your own battles with anxiety and depression and just not being able to find, a way to get rid of that and make yourself feel better?
Yeah, and the nuance, the answer is a little nuanced in the sense that if I gave a very simple answer, it's what you just said, right? Was basically I dealt with anxiety, I dealt with depression. I didn't know what I was doing. I didn't know what I was experiencing. When I first started dealing with anxiety in earnest, it was 2007, 2008. And so the internet and, Amazon and Google, those places just weren't as filled with information as they are now. And so if you went onto Google in 2007 and you said I'm nervous, right? You don't get the same search results that you do now. And obviously it's sort of a pros and cons sort of thing where maybe there's a lot more information now and not all of it is good, but going back to 2007, I remember, and I talk about this in my first book, I guess technically this was 2008, but I had suffered my first, this was my second panic attack of the year. And I woke up the next day and I was just so beside myself, feeling as though, what the heck was that? I just experienced another panic attack. I don't have the verbiage or the lexicon, to talk about this stuff. I don't even know the term panic attack. I'm just I was out on a date with a girl that I really like and I freaked out and she called me out on it and it was so embarrassing, and I'm 18 years old and talking to myself and being how am I supposed to live my life this way, right? And then I go onto Google and I'm nervousness, heart racing, whatever, and I'm stumbling upon random websites of, HTML1 websites that look like they were built in the 90s, and somebody's send me $100 on PayPal and I'll give you, my ebook or whatever. And it's these crappy ebooks that are designed as if, they're on a scroll or something like that. And so it felt like it was the Wild West back then. The reason why I say it's a nuanced answer, and you can already tell based on what I've said thus far, but maybe I didn't know who to talk to. Maybe I didn't know the right places to look for the information. Maybe it was there, but from my vantage point, I was as an 18-year-old kid, I have no idea how to solve this problem. I have no idea how to even begin the journey. And so even if that information was out there, it wasn't accessible or wasn't obvious to me as to how to find it, right? So for me, it was like struggling with that anxiety and later struggling with depression. I just took my own, I come from the tech world, so I think about products and user experience all the time. And so my vantage point was sort of like, okay, even if there's tons of doctors who know exactly what this stuff is, can diagnose and treat and all that, from my point of view, me, sitting my butt in my chair in front of my computer, I'm like, hey, I looked and I couldn't find it. So I'm not saying that it's not out there, but I couldn't find it. And there's a lot of people out there that are going to be like me. So how do I help address that problem a little bit? How do I say, okay, what information can I deliver to folks that are in a similar situation that might be able to find this information and have it be a little bit more accessible, and then make it so that they don't get into the same conundrum I was in, where I was like, not only do I not know how to solve this, but I'm looking, I feel like I can't find information, and that makes the whole battle that much worse, right? So
Yeah.
long and short really was, over the course of a decade, really struggling with anxiety, really struggling with depression, and then finally making some progress with both of those conditions. I looked back and I was like, look, man, like, I'm not saying that this is the worst thing in the world. People obviously have it worse. You can always compare up or down. All I know is that what I went through was really hard, and I don't want other people to have to go through that. So in some small way, I want to impact the space to be able to say, hey, if somebody's looking for tools and advice on anxiety or depression, maybe they can find my website, and maybe that will help them on their journey to get them moving a little bit faster. Obviously, it's hard to improve the entire space, fix the problem altogether, but I just wanted to contribute in any way that I could.
That's great, man. And I mean, I commend you for that, and just to go and have the bravery and the courage to tackle that. And I'm not saying this was you, but a lot of people also just struggle with the stigma attached to, the term mental illness, and they shouldn't, because it can happen to anybody. And there's that certain, like, "Oh, I don't want to go see a psychiatrist." There's a lot of people that think that way. And it's unfortunate because, people can find help through various means, whether it's through like a psychologist or a psychiatrist, or, a pastor at a church or whatever. But, it's great that you actually took the steps to tackle this yourself. I don't think everybody does that all the time. You know what I mean?
Yeah, and I'm going to be, I guess, blunt for a minute, right? And try to put a new lens on the phenomenon that you just described, right? And I don't say this to be curt or anything like that. Like, I fully empathize with everybody who is dealing with anxiety, who's dealing with depression, who's dealing with mental illness. It is so hard. At the same time, if you look at it and you say, like, okay, if you had a coach look at it and say, okay, let's just secretively say, here's what you're dealing with. You're dealing with mental illness. You're dealing with depression, whatever, right? If you are unwilling to put yourself out there, to, have the courage to talk to somebody, to go to a psychiatrist, whatever it may be, you are valuing something else over your own mental health. Maybe that is your image to other people, your willingness to admit things to yourself. And if you really boil it down, again, I'm not trying to be flippant here, but if you think about it, right, it's like, if you say, and obviously mental illness is really hard, and so it can push people to the edge, the end of the rope, right? And let's just say somebody gets to that place where they're like, I don't know if I want to be here anymore. My challenge to somebody who is listening and having that approach, again, full empathy for you. However, if you're saying, maybe I don't want to be here right now, and I'm not willing to go talk to somebody, I don't have that courage, you are making a decision in your mind to value your secrecy, your privacy, whatever it may be, over going and getting that information. And so my challenge to somebody who is listening would be to say, like, dude, think about that decision. Don't you want to live, right? Who cares about other people's opinions? And, when you kind of said, like, Brian, you had some courage to write these books and whatnot, I'm like, I appreciate that. I certainly do. And yeah, there was a little bit of courage in there, but honestly, I had to write these books.
Yeah.
Like, my life depended on it, to be completely honest. It was like, I get this information out of me, it is cathartic for me, or I feel so horrible all the time. And maybe, I'm starting to think about these terrible paths of self-harm or whatever it may be. And so
Yeah.
that's the lens I look at it through, still keeping that empathy though, to be like, look, I know how hard this is. I'm not saying it's easy to pick up the phone and call somebody.
Right.
However, like, think about those ramifications, right? It's like you have people you love, they love you, they want to see you here, they want to see you thriving. Make that decision and be like, look, this sucks. It stinks for me to admit the fact that I'm struggling right now, but I would rather do that than not be here anymore. Does that make
Yeah.
sense?
Absolutely. Yeah, definitely. And so, given that, like, what's your approach to this issue? Like, how does it differ from others in this space? I know it's personalized. I'm assuming you don't have like a therapist's background and you take this from more of a coaching perspective. And there's a lot of different schools of thought with mental health and mental health experts today. So what makes your approach different from others?
Yeah, I think there's probably two pieces. So the first is you can kind of catch the drift already, right? I try to bring like a no BS approach to this subject. And I think the fact that, what I the rant that I just went on, right? Most people, most people in the space would probably not say something like what I just said because it's controversial and it's a little in your face, so to
Yeah.
speak, right?
Yeah.
But my whole view is like, dude, this is the battle of your life. You have to
Right.
take it seriously.
Yeah.
And if you don't, who knows where that could lead? It could lead to really bad places. So, my opinion and my approach and strategy are like, let's look at this, let's deal with reality, let's embrace it, and let's figure out how to move past it as quickly as possible. One of the things in the anxiety and depression space, a lot of psychiatrists will say that people who, for example, have hypochondriasis, who are hypochondriacs, they will spin the wheels in their minds day after day, month after month, year after year of like, oh, what if I have this disease? What if I'm sick? What if I have that disease? My mindset is, okay, if you feel you have that, right? Go to the doctor, get a test, get it validated that you don't have it, and move the F on. Does that,
Yeah.
does that resonate?
Yeah. Yeah. Big time. Big
So
time.
so that's number one is sort of the no BS approach. The second piece is coming at it from a place of experience. And I don't, so I will often say like, hey, I have a unique view on this because I've been where you have been. And I'll be totally honest. There are still days, right, where it's like where I'm anxious, where I'm depressed, but I feel like I have some tools that help me better navigate that stuff now. I will sometimes say the experience piece is what gives me a little bit more credibility in the space, but it's not to take away from the physicians at all. Like physicians are amazing, and good ones, obviously, and they're able to provide sort of also like a coaching mindset in the sense that they can see past your blind spots, right? Like we can't always see what we're dealing with because it's our problems, and sometimes we have slowly fallen into them over time, whereas somebody else can be like, you're doing that thing, it's so glaringly obvious to me, if that makes sense. So
Yeah.
those are kind of the two pieces. Is one, coming at it from an angle of saying like, hey, I hope you can trust me, I hope you can understand that I know what this is like. And then two is coming in with that, maybe at times a little rough around the edges approach to be like, let's figure this out and move on, because
Yeah.
why suffer? Why struggle? Worst case
Yeah.
scenario is you talk to somebody, they diagnose you with something, which would stink, don't get me wrong, but
Mhm.
like, don't suffer twice, suffer once and then move on.
Yeah. No, I mean, if I was seeking help in that realm, that's probably an approach that would help me just given my personality. Just this no BS approach, let's nip this in the bud and move on. But do you think for some people who are like in the thick of it, because mental illness affects people in different ways, right? Like different people react to it in different ways. And like, I can kind of resonate with the hypochondriac example that you shared a minute ago because I dealt with some of that when my father passed away many, many years ago because he died very, very sick. And he was very, very sick, hospitalized for the last 6 months of his life. And so I like watched him from this like strong, kind of tough guy, model dad, can do anything, invincible superhero, down to this like 90-pound body, just sick. And like, man, it traumatized me. Like I'm being open here about that. It really traumatized me. So I walked with that for years. And there's just this fear that I think sometimes people who suffer from that specific issue can deal with. It's like, you're right, 100%. Go to the doctor. If you don't have it, move on. Don't sit there and fear it. But they fear that possible positive diagnosis. Like, oh, do I have cancer? What if I have cancer? And they fear getting that news. Do you know what I mean? And it's not an excuse, but I just think that's how some people react in that specific situation. Does that make sense?
It makes a lot of sense. I do want to pause and say I'm sorry to hear that you went through that. That's really really hard.
No, I appreciate that.
And you're totally right. That is the pattern, And again, it's not like all of my work in the space and my approach. None of it is to belittle any of this because all of this is hard. Life is really hard. It's more just to be like, practically speaking, right? If you talk to doctors, if you do the research, it's like, okay, if you are afraid of having a specific condition, those conditions don't come up overnight, right? So it's like you go for a test, they show that there's nothing there, and then it's like, okay, maybe come back and do the test again in 6 months, 12 months, whatever it is, but catch it early. Don't worry about it because this thing it's not like, you're going to do the test today and then tomorrow you're going to have the disease and you're going to be in a really bad place, right? You would be at day zero and you'd be in good shape. Getting that diagnosis, do not get me wrong. Like, I don't want that. Nobody wants that nobody wants that. That is terrifying. I guess what I'm trying to say is that, like, when you talk to psychiatrists in the space who deal with hypochondriasis, they will say that the pattern for hypochondriacs is basically they will spin the wheels in their minds forever and never do anything about it, but also not actually like think about the specifics, right? So I was reading a book. It was in the fall, and I wish I could remember the name of it. I could try to send it to you, off stage, and you could maybe put in the show notes, whatever, right? But he was saying, so the author, it was about a book about anxiety, and he was basically saying, like, people will spin the wheels in their minds thinking that they have, the C word, but what they will do is it's like it's sort of a superficial fear of, they're like, oh, what if I'm sick? What if I'm sick? What if I'm sick? They'll never actually say, okay, well, if I am sick, then I go to the best hospital, I get the best treatment, or I go to a hospital, I get good treatment, we treat it early, and I get support from people in my family. We figure out a way to battle through this, right? It's just this fear that runs in your mind, and so that's the thing that I want to pull out there, is basically being like, we can address that fear. We obviously, like, there's no way for us to be able to be like, hey, Mike, I can guarantee you will never get X disease, right? It's more just we can approach the fear in a more reasonable fashion. And then it's like, yeah, life is still hard. Whatever comes our way, we just have to deal with it. But we can set ourselves up for potential success, or the best success possible given the circumstances that eventually play out, if you catch my drift.
Yeah, absolutely. No, that you make some great points there. And I know mental illness seems to be so prevalent today. I know it's always been there. People have battled it, but I just think the rapid lifestyle, the staring at phones and electronics, heavy electronics usage, all those things, people not spending enough time in nature, I think that's kind of ramped that up. But so many people suffer from anxiety and depression these days. And, what do you think are some of the factors driving this trend, other than maybe the ones I just mentioned?
Yeah, I think the ones that you mentioned are actually top of the list, but there are certainly a lot of them. So, one of the things that I have grown a little bit more fond of as of late is like looking into evolutionary psychology and evolution research and just thinking about, right? It's like, okay, we have many, many ancestors, not that we know who all of them are or were, but we've got a lineage, right? And it's like all these different people who lived certain ways, and the body, not only like we did certain things over time, but we evolved to, our bodies evolved in ways that, like, incentivized or rewarded certain behaviors. And so I think about the fact that we want to live in accordance with our internal wiring, right? Our evolutionary wiring. And it kind of feels as though if we don't, we set ourselves up for a bunch of different maladies. I think that anxiety and depression are two of them, but I also think that there's many, right? So if you say, like, hey, you go back thousands of years ago and you say people used to live outside, and I will address the fact that there are cons to an old lifestyle as well, but people used to live outside. They used to get a lot of sunlight. They used to get fresh air. They would eat whole foods and produce and, living foods. They would be with their tribes people, right? They would have close knit social connections with a small group of people, so on and so forth. So you look at how we used to live and you say, okay, how far away from that have we come? So thinking about sort of building off of what you said a minute ago, what is the modern lifestyle like? We use a lot of technology. We sit in front of screens, I would say almost all day, every day. A lot of us live in cities that are not that clean, right? The air quality is not that great. We eat a lot of processed food. The food does not have a lot of nutrients in it, to be totally honest. We're on social media comparing ourselves to other people, doom scrolling. There are also just the modern horrors of life, right? It's like, we can hop on to our phones and get the news. We can turn on CNN, whatever it may be, and see these scary headlines that thousands of years ago, like, sure, bad things still happen in the world, but we never heard about them, or at the very least, we heard about them in the newspaper like a month later,
Yeah,
So
right.
life is stressful these days, and it just is not in accordance with the way that our bodies were constructed. So I think, there's a lot of research here, and I tend to talk about it, or I do address it in my second book, which is the book on depression. And so, my argument is basically depression, to a degree, is a disease of the modern lifestyle. And so if we address that modern lifestyle and we live a little bit more like our hunter-gatherer ancestors, we will combat some of that depression and also anxiety, because they're two peas in a pod, right? But so, to kind of give the synopsis or whatever, getting back to a whole food, plant-based or plant-forward diet, and, it doesn't have to be veganism or anything like that, but you got to make sure that you're eating fruits and vegetables, or at the very least vegetables, right? You need minerals, you need fiber. It's really going to help your brain and your body. And a lot of the foods that we eat, right, they're not very high in omega-3 fatty acids. They're high in omega-6s. There's research out there that shows that omega-3 fatty acids are really good for our brains and also like help with depression. And then you think about the fact that we sit in front of these screens, right? It's like, not only are we consuming toxic information from our devices all day, every day, but we're sitting down, right? And our bodies love to move. I mean, as you can tell, I could talk about this stuff forever. But I went to physical therapy last year because my back was messed up. And it was just so fascinating. Like, the things that would come out of the therapist's mouth, they'd be like, I'd say, oh, this hurts, that hurts, whatever. And they're like, well, how do you sit? And how do you work? And how do you sleep? And when you're watching TV, how do you watch TV? And basically, not to be too daunting, but basically every answer I gave, they'd be like, that's bad for your back. That's bad for your body. That's bad for your legs, right? And just starting to think about this and be like, sort of reframing how I look at my entire life and saying, okay, my running form is bad. That hurts my back. I'm slouching in chairs and on couches. That's bad. So starting to reconstruct, how I use my body and just being more conscious of the fact that, our bodies love to move. And there's a ton of research of showing how important exercise is for not only the body, but also the mind. So trying to combat that sedentariness a little bit. I could go on for hours on this subject, but I think the takeaway is we need to think about how our bodies were built, by evolution, and then align ourselves with actions that are more in accordance with that old lifestyle, right? So be active, eat good foods, be with people, right? Get off of the devices. Don't slouch in your chair, and make sure that your muscles and your bones are supported, and exercise and lift weights and all that stuff. So yeah, I guess I'll put a bow on that one, but I could go on that for hours.
No, all great points. I'm with you on just about all of it. And it's funny, there's a study that I heard, and I don't know the name of it now, and if I can find it, I'll put it in the show notes for everyone. It was a study, I believe some physician did in the 60s, where he locked a dozen university students in a basement for 2 weeks. And after a few days, they were all of them were suicidal. Just how much impact our environment has on our mental health. I might be giving the times wrong. I don't know if they were locked in there the 2 weeks, but within a short duration of time, all of them were suicidal, which really just hit me when I heard that how toxic our environments can be if we don't take active steps to clean some of that up, whether
Yeah,
it's how we're eating, where we're spending our time. I mean, you and I hate saying it, we're looking at screens right now. It's kind of the only way to do it unless we're in the same studio. So that's just the way we got to roll. But everything encompasses staring at a screen now. You can't work if you don't have a screen in front of you. It doesn't matter where you are.
for sure. And
So
I think the important piece, right, is to balance all this stuff, right? Nobody, I'm not saying, go out and live in the woods, right? Because that would be terrible, right? But like, I think we need to balance some of the great things about our modern lifestyle with some of the great things of the old lifestyle, so to
yeah,
speak, right? And so it's like, hey, this is social connection. It's not the same as being in a room with somebody, but this is certainly better than like me just working in an Excel spreadsheet all day, right? If I'm
yeah,
talking to somebody and I'm having a cool connection and conversation, that's definitely something. And you kind of made a point there that made me think of something I heard on a podcast recently, which it's sad, but it's also funny. Is sort of the modern lifestyle and society basically says like the pinnacle, and I'll use both men and women, but the pinnacle is like a successful lawyer who lives by themselves in a nice apartment and drinks fancy wine, lives in New York, and like lives like a cush lifestyle, right? And it's like, based on the research I've done, based on, I live by myself right now and just my own life experiences, I'm like, that sounds like mental illness, to be completely honest, right? So it's like the messages that society is pushing on us of be successful, be independent, live in these nice places and whatnot. It's like, that's not always so good for our mental health, And I think the fact that so many of us are moving to, coastal cities and where rent's really expensive. And so it's like buy a small apartment where you're separated from everybody else, but you live in this cool city and you can show on Instagram that you got all this clout or whatever. I'm like, it's so backwards and we're just going down the wrong path. So I think it's important to step back and say, like, remember to get that connection. Remember that your actual mental health is so much more important than what other people think of you. Like what other people think of you is really not that big of a deal. And to be honest, in psychology, there's a term called the spotlight effect, which is basically we all think that everybody is looking at us all the time and there's a spotlight over our heads. In reality, everybody has that same thought running through their minds. And yet all of us are just minding our own business, right? We're all focused on ourselves. So it's more important to prioritize how you feel versus, and obviously how you perceive others, how you think about others perceiving you is part of that equation. But I guess what I'm saying is pull that out a little bit and be like, what do you actually care about? What makes you tick? What makes you happy? Go after that. Don't worry so much about, the stuff of people sort of, looking at you and thinking about you and all that. So.
yeah, we obsess over the wrong things for sure. A lot of us, I've been guilty of that many times in my life and continue to be. So what's been one of the most profound experiences that you've had with your own struggles and your own mental illness that has made its way into your writing?
Whew. I guess I would really have to sit and think about this one for a while because the two books are very heavily focused around, my battles with anxiety, my battles with depression. I guess honestly, to pull one out that might not be the most profound, but is just a fun one to talk about that I don't talk about often is like, in my first book, I talk about, and again, this is because it's not the most profound. It's just kind of a fun one, right? So I don't want folks to be like, oh, dude, what is he talking about? But so there was a time, it was 10, 11 years ago, like I really wanted to go skydiving. And so I booked a reservation. It was like a month out, maybe 2 weeks out, something like that. And at the time, I had very little experience or like I had experience with anxiety, but I didn't have the good kind where like I didn't know what I was doing. I was just ruminating and continuing to turn the wheels in my mind. And so I spent 2 weeks just like obsessing about this skydive, and being like, okay, I'm on the plane, I'm visualizing myself, I'm seeing myself jump out of the plane and the parachute is deploying and I'm safe and all this because, you read a lot of different books like, maybe I won't say the book names, but I will say maybe like law of attraction style content, right?
Yeah.
And it says you got to visualize yourself doing the thing that you wish to achieve, achieving the goal that you wish to achieve, having the thing that you want to have, and look, if that works for you, that's great. All I know is that with anxiety, that can become a real toxic soup real fast, because what happens is you have this fear in your mind, but you also have this desire, and the fear and the desire get bound up inside of each other. And so if we were really good at sort of this visualization practice, right, we'd see ourselves doing something good, we'd feel good about it, we'd move on. The issue is we go into that visualization, we feel the fear and the desire at the same time. We're sort of bound up inside and we're like, I don't know what to do now. And goodness, now I'm thinking too hard and I can't visualize myself. And oh man, why can't I visualize, and all this stuff. And so we kind of get into this, I don't know, if you call it maybe like a terrible feedback loop, right? Where it's like, you feel bad, then you feel bad because you feel bad, then you can't visualize, and so on and so forth. And so I did that for about 2 weeks, right? And I put myself into a bad place. And again, kind of with my preamble, I was like, this is not that big of a deal, right? It's just a skydive. I could have canceled it if I wanted to. So I'm not trying to make this sound like that important of a thing. However, we'll get to the message eventually, which is, kind of seeing some of these strategies or these tactics come through and see how they can be powerful, right? So I spent 2 weeks or a month, whatever that amount of time was, just spinning these wheels in my mind, right? And I felt so terrible. I remember the day before the skydive, the originally planned skydive, I was like beside myself. I was so far inside my head, I could barely really actually think. I felt so horrible. I could barely I could walk, but I just felt like I was like moving through mud, And I was like, well, I'm probably going to die on this skydive, but whatever. Let's just do it. I'm so horrified, and I felt so horrible for the last 2 weeks. I go to bed, I wake up, I'm so nervous. I'm like, oh my goodness, I have no idea why I'm doing this, whatever. And I look over, my phone is, buzzing from a text message, and it says, hey, guess what? Your skydive is actually canceled because it's about to rain out, So it was funny because I was like, wow, I actually am so happy right now. I'm so excited that it's canceled, and yet I didn't even skydive. I didn't do this fun thing that I wanted to do. That doesn't make a ton of sense, but it was sort of for me, it was a reminder that our minds can make us feel so horrible, and we can also influence our minds, right? Given the cognitive loops that I was running in my head, I can make it so that my mind makes me feel terrible. Anyway, fast forward, I think it was probably 3 years later, my friend texts me, he's like, hey, I want to go skydiving for my birthday. And I'm like, no. Given what happened a few years earlier, I cannot do that.
Yeah.
But at that point, I had started to have some anxiety breakthroughs. And this is where I started writing, my first book. And I was like, okay, I still want to do this. This is still on my bucket list. And so what I did was I took the framework that's in my first book for helping people kind of walk back anxiety once it's already revved up. And I was like, look, I want to do this. I'm going to commit to it. I'm going to commit to running this playbook or the framework that I have spelled out, or I'm going to spell out in my first manuscript. And if I decide that I can't go through with it, I'm just going to cancel and I'm going to move on, So it was sort of having that experience in being able to say to myself, I'm not going down that path again. And the nice thing was, again, I'm not trying to say that this is that profound or anything like that. I'm just trying to, maybe a subtle sales pitch, right? Is I ended up going through with the skydive, and I had a great time. And it just felt validating to be like, look, I'm not a quote unquote expert. I'm not the smartest person in the world. But what I do know is that I'm starting to have some validation that the different tactics that I am using in my own life are working. And that was kind of the first time where it was like, aha, I'm on the right path, right? So I tell stories like that in the books to help people have concrete evidence of these different things that I'm putting in front of them, having evidence that those things work or can work for them, right? And the overall message that I have in that story is the fact that you got to figure out what tools work for you on the mental health front and then lean on those hard, right? Yeah. And also, to some degree, we need to know what doesn't work for us and avoid that when possible. Obviously, this stuff is not easy, but the most important thing, going back to the beginning of the conversation, right, is I didn't have those tools when I was 18, and that's what made me feel so lost. So part of my work in this space is helping to empower people by giving them those tools and then allowing them to be like, I'm going to build my own mental health toolkit, and I'm going to leverage that when I am going into a situation where I feel really anxious or I'm going through a depressive episode or something like that.
Yeah. No, you put things in a very digestible form for people to be able to grasp these concepts. So, I think your approach can impact a lot of people in a positive way. Um, Anxiety's huge today. You've battled it, you've shared that. I've definitely had my share of battles with anxiety in my life. Panic attacks are a big deal. A lot of people have these panic attacks. They come out of nowhere. They're terrifying when they can happen. Um, what are some ways that you know of that can stop or slow like anxiety in the moment if somebody feels that creeping up? Do you deal with that yourself? And if you do, what do you do to stop it?
Yeah, it's a good question. There are obviously many ways that we can address anxiety as it comes up. And again, not to be too salesy, but I do have a framework in my first book. If folks want to, pick that up or take a look at those different tactics. So I supply 10 different tactics to folks. So I call this framework the 10 steps to getting out of your head. By virtue of the name, you can kind of tell that it's basically like, okay, you're already feeling anxious. What can you do to walk back that feeling? I try to be as honest as I can on podcasts, in my content, and all that. One of the things as I go back into that book and I think about it is the tactics are great. I still use them. They've been very helpful in my own life. If they weren't, I wouldn't have written a book about them. At the same time, I have identified the fact that like the awareness piece of being able to say, here's how I'm feeling, right? I'm feeling anxious. Oh, I need to go get my tactics and use them. That is actually kind of the hardest piece, to be totally honest. So, like, if I answer the question that way or looking through that lens, I would say the most important thing is to sort of use your experiences to develop a gauge in your own mind to be able to say, I'm going there again, right? And then stop that sort of train in its tracks. That's where, like, I guess once you say, I'm there or I'm going there, that's when you pull out your 10 steps. But again, this stuff is really hard where so many of our thoughts happen on a subconscious level where it's like we're turning the wheels in our minds without even realizing it. And then 30 minutes later, it's like, oh crap, I was supposed to have my 10 steps and use them, but I didn't. So, not a sexy answer, but I guess the answer is sort of what I just mentioned of creating, using your experiences to develop that gauge. But then also, I think two important things. One would be like, so going back to the brand itself, right? Get out of your head. Yeah. Remembering to get back into your body and out of your mind during those stressful situations in any way possible. Sometimes people will say, hey, if you're feeling super anxious, run around the block. And it sounds silly, but it's pretty helpful because what's going on, right, is like when we're anxious, we're turning these ideas over in our heads. And if we can get back into our bodies and out of that headspace, then often the feelings and the symptoms associated with them will also kind of maybe not go away, but they'll quiet down. So that's a helpful thing is to just like, do 10 jumping jacks, run down the street, run down the hallway, whatever it may be. Then maybe you get to that point of being able to have the awareness to be like, I feel a little bit better. Let me go get my mental health toolkit or my 10 steps now. Yeah. I think the other piece, right, is like, the piece one is getting back into your body in any way that is you feel is empowering or helpful for you. The other piece is remembering to tap into your breathing, right? So it's sort of, I don't know, that's another way that we can get into our bodies, right? Because instead of being in our minds, we're focusing on our lungs, our stomach, whatever it may be. And if you look at I'll say science, but it's kind of just like you look at anatomy, right? And you basically say in the nervous system, the autonomic nervous system, the part of our nervous system that runs for the most part automatically, we have the sympathetic nervous system and the parasympathetic nervous system, which are two sort of polar opposite subdivisions of that ANS, autonomic nervous system. And so the sympathetic nervous system is what we normally refer to, or like sometimes we refer to as the fight or flight nervous system. So it's what revs us up during times of stress. And then the parasympathetic nervous system is what calms us down on the other side of a threat, or once we have either neutralized the threat or we have just moved on from it, right? And so one of the ways that we can activate the parasympathetic nervous system, which again is that sort of force function for calming us down, is to do some deep breathing. And so as we breathe deeply, not only do we activate the parasympathetic nervous system, but also if you think about it, right? If you are in front of like a hungry lion, there is no time to stop and think about it, right? You got to get the heck out of there real fast. And so what that means is our rational capacities go offline when we get revved up, or in other words, when our sympathetic nervous systems come online. So as we start to do some deep breathing and activate the parasympathetic nervous system, all of a sudden our rational capacities begin to come back online a bit. And that's why I say, once you start to get back into your body a little bit, then you can say, let me go get my 10 steps, right? Because if you're in front of a lion, you're not going to be like, oh, Brian told me 10 steps and let me think about those and rehearse them, right? You got to do something to get you back into that place of rational awareness. And then you go into kind of the thought exercise, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it makes perfect sense. And, you know, it's a great title, Get Out of Your Head, because I think that's where 99% of our issues can come from, or close to that. The older I get, the more I catch myself when I'm going into an unhealthy thought pattern, whether it's a fear about something or anxiousness about something. Your mind can be your worst enemy. And so, yeah, definitely like go for a walk, go run around the block, do some, for some people it's prayer, or some people it's meditation, whatever you can do to tap into that system where you're more in touch with your body and you're not using this so much, because we're just using these all day, right? So yeah, you make some great points there, man. I totally agree with you on that. And it's like a skill you can develop over time. And I haven't mastered it, but I have learned over the years to catch myself when those unhealthy thought patterns start. You got to have a healthy thought life. You know what I mean?
There's no doubt about it. And, I appreciate you being candid, and I try to do the same. I haven't mastered it either. There are days where I still struggle with this stuff too, but having those tools at our disposal, right? That gives us a big leg up. And so maybe we falter still 1 out of 10 times or whatever, but that's a lot better than 10 out of 10,
Yeah, definitely. So mental health was a very big issue during the pandemic, just because of the extreme circumstances people were living under. Some states were locking down more than others. The isolation that people experienced. Do you think that time in history changed us as a species from a mental health perspective? Do you think that took us off the rails more? Do you think more people struggle just after that traumatic experience? Because there's people that lost loved ones. It was such a weird time in modern history. Do you think that's had any impact on us that's lasting from a mental health perspective?
Yeah, it's hard to answer definitively, right? Because it's almost like I can say for sure that it had an impact. Now, whether that impact was a product of the times and then we reset and we go back to normal life and everybody moves on, that's what I'm not as sure of. I think, right, to give a cop-out answer, it's like in 10 years we will know whether it was lasting. Yeah. If I had to give an educated guess, or if I were to, if I were to make a guess about it, I would say yes, there was an impact. Now, whether and a lasting one, whether that's going to be a massive lasting impact, I don't know. Because if you think about the circumstances, I would say that most of us didn't actually take that impact and change our lives profoundly. And what I mean by that is, if it had that big of an impact, I would say we probably in droves, or at least to a non-negligible degree, we would have gotten off of social media. We would have prioritized, hanging out with people in person, and we would have been better to each other, right?
Yeah.
Obviously, whatever information you are looking to find, you can find it on the internet. So I can't really point at, one article and say, see, this is what happened, or see, that's what happened. But it does feel, the sentiment at least feels like that event messed us up, right?
Yeah.
And it also came during this weird socially and politically divided time where I think it kind of, honestly, it divided us further, right? You've got people, and I'm going to try to sit in the middle and just sort of, I'll say diagnose, but that's the wrong word, right? Sort of just put my own interpretation on it. Is like, during that time, it was like we got people being like, hey, science, lean into science. And then we got other people being like, no, science isn't real. And it's just like people digging their heels in and backing further off from one another. And I think that there are often good arguments on both sides of the aisle. The issue, right, is like, I think it feels like in the last however many years, the fringe on both sides has really sort of been magnified. And I
Yeah.
think that has divided us further. And I
Yep.
don't think that that is good, right? Because then all of a sudden you're like, now you start thinking to yourself and you're like, oh, all these people in the world are messed up because they believe XYZ, right? I wish I wish that COVID was more of a time for us to take a step back and be like, look, dude, like life is really hard. These are people, people in my community, people in my neighborhood. These are all people that I am on this journey with, and I need to be, more respectful to them, more understanding of them because of the fact that we're going through a global pandemic where like nobody knows what the heck is happening. I would say because of those different things and many other ones, right? I think that collective mental health got worse. There were also, and a little wishy washy of an answer, honestly, but there were also some positive developments in the sense that because mental health was so bad, given the fear of what was going on, but then also the isolation and the change in, how we lived our lives, I think it forced people to speak up. And I think the conversation around mental health grew and got bigger and better during that time. And I think it still is, it's now getting more attention. The issue that I have, or the issue that I see, is that we're talking about it more, but the numbers are not going in a direction where you'd be like, hey, that ended up being a positive thing for all of us. And we made changes because of what we went through. In my opinion, right? It's like we're seeing more books, we're seeing more media attention on mental health, but there's more drug prescriptions written. There are more cases diagnosed. I don't see it going in the proper direction just yet. So, again, to give a succinct answer after all of that, I would say it had an effect. It had a negative effect. If you like, that's my opinion. I do hope that people, like at some point, right, will start to see that we're going in the wrong direction, and if we want to help people, like we got to change our behavior. I don't feel confident that that is happening yet. However, my contributions to the space are trying to be like, look, call some of these things out, help empower people, give them the tools to work through some of these conditions. And then maybe I affect 100 people, maybe I affect
Yeah.
1,000 people, but that's my contribution to the space. And hopefully other people can do that as well, where we
Yeah.
start to get a little bit of a domino effect. I'm rambling, but it was a weird time. It still is weird times. And I just hope that, I hope that the numbers start going in a more positive direction, because it feels like even though the conversation is growing, we haven't gotten there yet. And that kind of stinks, where it's like, I'll be totally honest. I don't make that much money from my books. But even if I did, honestly, it's such a weird thing when you're like, I'm in business to solve a problem. And then the business gets big enough where you're like, oh, geez, I need to hold on to the problem to make the money, right? It's like, honestly, if I could write these books, not even sell that many copies, but all of a sudden it's like anxiety gone, depression gone, boom, I do that in a heartbeat. And I don't care. It's
Yeah.
not about the money. It never has been. So I really do hope that we start to see some changes societally around these topics, but it's all very difficult, and life is difficult. And, I think hopefully we get there, but it will probably be a little bit slow.
Yeah, it's weird, man. Like you hit on some really interesting things there. And, traditionally, adversity makes people better and brings us together. And I'm probably older than you, but I remember the impact of 9/11 on America, and how people just threw politics aside and just got together. And, politicians and mayors were like digging out the rubble, and we just saw so much decency come out of that terrible, terrible event that happened on U.S. soil. And so I wish I could say the same for the pandemic, but it doesn't feel like that happened. It didn't feel like we improved as a people. It didn't feel like we came together, even though we're past that terrible time in history that we all had to endure. It feels like people are still divided. People are still, you know, in their specific tribes, divided over so many issues and still living in anxiousness. Like you said, more prescriptions have been written. That's not really the answer we want. That's not like a true solution, in my opinion. It's a remedy, it helps. It gives people tools to cope. But I just don't feel like that tragedy had the same positive result after the fact that some past tragedies did. Tragedies are all bad. I'm not saying welcome them in any way. But, humanity has this way of just coming together after a tragedy. And I don't feel like that's happened after the pandemic. Does that make sense?
It makes a lot of sense. And, I listen to a lot of different podcasts, and there was definitely people who were kind of like, look, we're so divided in this country. And I say this like, I'm quoting them. I'm not saying that I wanted this at all, but they were like, we need some common event, some unifying tragedy, right, to bring us together, pre-COVID. And then COVID happened. It's like, nope, that did not do it, to your point, and it didn't work. And I don't think they were really saying they want that to happen. I think they were like, maybe if it does happen, it will have this unifying effect, like 9/11 did, like you said.
Yeah.
But it clearly didn't. And I don't know if the genie's out of the bottle, in the sense that social media and the news are just like so toxic and so divisive that we might not get there. I don't know. I'm not a historian. I'm not a predictor of the future. I would love to see that happen. I think that, to be honest, and it's tough to talk about politics, but I think politics has become so weaponized over the last, probably since 2016. And I really don't offer an opinion. I'm a moderate. I don't really care. It's like I look at the individual issues. I vote based on those things. I don't care about people's politics, in the sense that, like, you can believe whatever you want to believe and we can be friends.
Yeah.
But I don't think that is the common belief across America. And I wish it were, because those things don't really matter, to be totally honest. What really matters, honestly, is like your friends, your family, your relationships with those people. Are you doing things that you're passionate about? Are you excited to get up every day? That's what, like, boil it all down. Politics does not matter. It really doesn't. And I hate to say it, but it just doesn't. Like, it can affect you, right? A tax policy or a social policy or something. But, like, what really matters is, like, the stuff at home. And you look at the teachings of somebody like Jordan Peterson or something like that. He will often say, clean your room, right? What he's trying to say is the most important stuff starts in your own personal life, right? If you are going on these diatribes of talking about politics all day, every day, it's like, it's kind of a sign that something is seriously wrong in your own life. So address that first and then see what happens.
Yep. No, 100%. And, you mentioned social media, and, I wonder how much of a factor that is, because during 9/11, there was no social media. So maybe that's been more of a hindrance than a benefit, with what we have, just a thought, putting it out there.
It feels like you're right.
Yeah.
I don't know if we'll ever know for sure, but it feels like you're right.
Yeah. So, Brian, talk to that individual who's listening right now, who's in the throes of depression. What is the first thing that you would tell them when they're in that dark feeling that they're having?
Yeah, going back to sort of the no BS approach, right? And I will get a little choked up as I say this, to be honest, but I would be like, look, if I'm talking to a dude or I'm talking to a woman, I'll just pretend as though I'm talking to a dude right now. And I'd be like, look, I love you. You're going through a lot. This is really hard, but guess what? You can get through it. We're going to figure out a way through it. And we're going to get you back on a path of something that you enjoy, that you're excited about. We need to find out what that is. We need to kind of clear the path, so to speak, get the obstacles out of the road, reconnect you to that hope and to that vision, and get you back. Because right now you are seeing things through a terrible, terrible lens, right? You're looking out into the world and you're saying, life is terrible, everything is terrible, nothing's ever going to be good, right? But that is the depression talking. And so if we can get you to change that mood a little bit, right? If we can work on the actual, like the headspace that you're in, all of a sudden you will be able to, in time, look back out at the world and say, oh, not everything is so dark anymore, right? Maybe I coming to the understanding that it is me and not necessarily the things in the world. So we gotta address that first. But it requires a lot of, compassion and hope and help and all that stuff. So I would say to that person, like, if you can, trust me a little bit. I love you so much. I know you're going through so much. You've been through a lot. I have so much respect for you, and it's so difficult, but there's still hope that we're going to get through this. Give me some time, and we eventually will.
Awesome, man. So talk about your coaching service for people in this space. Like, how does it work? How do you approach it? Do they sign up? Is it a membership thing? Give us some more insight into that.
Yeah, so I try to be flexible with folks where it's like it's so hard to run a business centered around like folks who are really struggling, right? So I try to be there for them in the sense that like, look, if you want to do an intro call, like a consult, do that for free, no big deal. We just shoot the breeze, see where you're at. If you're like, hey, I would like to sign up for 5 calls, 10 calls, whatever it may be, just put a package together that makes sense for you. And the pricing can be dynamic based on, if you sign up for a few more calls, give you a discount, that sort of thing, right? The overall philosophy of the coaching is basically, so I'd say 2 things, right? One is I'm not a doctor, I'm not a physician, so I can't diagnose and I can't treat. However, what I can do, right, is like I can take tactics that I talk about in my own books, as well as tactics that are out there in general, widely accepted, forms of, I'm not going to say treatment, but like different tools that exist out there that we can apply to the coaching client's life. So it's basically like taking that broader information. So if somebody reads my book and is like, hey, this is all great, but like, how does this apply to my life? That's what we do in the coaching sessions is we say, let's identify some tools that you can use in your own life that you could leverage to reframe things, or you could use in the middle of a panic attack, whatever it may be, right? We're just trying to build up that toolkit. Yeah. The second piece is sort of more like goal orientation, of the sense of like, because I can't diagnose and I can't treat, what I have to focus on is like, where are you? Where do you want to go? How do we help get you there? So it's kind of more like traditional coaching with a spin, a mental health spin on it, if you will.
Okay. So how can people find you, Brian?
Yeah, best place would be to go to my website. So that's getoutofyourhead.com. It's all one word, if you will, no dashes, no spaces. And then on social media right now, I am most active on Instagram. The account for the books is also Get Out of Your Head, no dashes, no spaces there. I'd like to add more social media accounts and post in other places, but I'll be honest, I got a full-time job that is not writing, that is not mental health. And so I do what I can.
Right. Right after we just both bashed social media. Right.
I wish there's some quote that I'm trying to think of,
Yeah.
It's something around, bowing to my master or whatever it is. I don't know.
Yeah. Hey, I'm not pointing fingers. I'm not a big fan of it, but in business, you just need it. That's the world we live in. So yeah, no, I was just messing with you.
Yeah. And on an honest note, right, I think it's important to be like, it's sort of a necessary evil. So how do I use these products in a way that aligns with my mental health? So it's like, don't follow the people that scare the living daylights out of you every day, right? Don't go into the comment sections. Don't get in battles with people in comment sections. Follow people that inspire you, that uplift you. Put limits on how long you use these things every day. It can help to have some guardrails on it.
Yeah, and don't argue about politics with strangers.
Don't do it. Don't do it.
Brian, this has been a lot of fun, man. Thanks for hanging out with us, and thanks for just doing the important work that you're doing, because this is something that a lot of people need to address in their lives. And so when they have avenues like yours to be able to tackle these issues and make their lives better, their mental health better, that I think that's vital in society today. So just keep doing what you're doing. And, I hope anybody that's listening out there can check your stuff out if they feel it can benefit them. And like I said, I'll include all the details in the show notes. And just keep doing what you're doing, man. It's people like you who make this world a better place. And I mean that.
Thanks, Mike. I appreciate it. It really was a fun conversation. And as you could tell, I could go for hours. So appreciate you having me on.
Well, that'll do it for this edition. Thanks for hanging out with us, guys. You know where to find us. And make sure you like and subscribe and check out our other episodes. And until next time, we're out of here. Take care, guys. Thanks.
The Mike C. Podcast.